Do your portraits or self-portraits feel flat, predictable, or even boring? If so, I have a solution for you, and it has nothing to do with your camera, your lens, or your technical skills. In fact, this solution isn't new at all. It is actually hundreds of years old, because the key to creating more powerful, emotional, and beautiful portraits is studying classical painters. In this video today, I'm going to show you 5 timeless portrait painters every photographer should study. Artists who mastered light, composition, and storytelling long before photography was even invented. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how you can apply their techniques to your own portrait and self-portrait photography. Let's get into it. Alright, but before we dive into the practical examples, let me just quickly explain why studying painters matters so much for photographers. So as photographers, it's quite easy to get caught up in trends and gear and all that stuff. But of course, painters didn't have any of that. They had to make deliberate decisions about light, pose, color, and mood every single time. And I think something quite interesting happens when you start studying painters, because you actually stop asking yourself, oh, is this image perfect? And rather you start to wonder, does this image make me feel something? So going forward now, as we look at each artist, don't start to think, oh, how do I copy their style? Instead, think about stealing their principles that you can then use in your portrait or self-portrait photography. Okay, so now let's start with the most obvious painter that, in my opinion, every portrait photographer should study, and that is Rembrandt. Even if you've never studied painting, you've probably heard of the lighting style Rembrandt lighting. And what makes Rembrandt so powerful is that he used light to really sculpt the face of his subjects. So in Rembrandt lighting, there is strong directional light that creates very deep shadows. But at the same time, there's just enough illumination to really guide your eye towards certain features or details in the picture or in the painting. So for us photographers, the takeaway is simple. Basically, don't be afraid of shadows. So if you want to adapt Rembrandt's lighting style to your portraits, you want to start with a directional, soft light source. Ideally, this should be from a window or from a diffused light source, for example, a large softbox. And then position that light source at an angle of about 45 degrees from your subject's face. And this setup naturally creates the hallmark of Rembrandt lighting, which is the so-called Rembrandt triangle. And that's simply a little triangle of light on the shadow side of the face of your subject, and you know you're doing it right when you start to see that little triangle appear. By the way, if you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe now. It only takes a second for you, but it really helps me more than you ever know. Thank you so much. Back to the video. Okay, then the next painter on my list today is Elisabeth Louise Viguier-Lebrun. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So Viguier-Lebrun was one of the most successful painters, female painters of the 18th century. And she is known for her elegant style and soft color palette. Her subjects are usually portrayed with a relaxed expression, natural pose, and flattering light. And I think it's well worth studying Viguier-Lebrun because she really shows that you can create images that feel classic without being overly formal. Her subjects rarely look stiff or uncomfortable. Instead, they appear approachable and confident. And next, an essential characteristic of Viguier-Lebrun's paintings is her use of color that gave her portraits a welcoming and elegant feel. You won't see many strong contrasts in her paintings, but rather smooth transitions and a more balanced palette. And as you can see in this example, that means that the subjects in her paintings tend to be unified with the background and with the clothing. So if you want to apply Viguier-Lebrun's style and practice, here are some tips. First of all, the lighting in her paintings is usually very soft and flattering. So to recreate this, you want to avoid harsh shadows. So again, like with Rembrandt, you can use a very large softbox or any other diffuse light source. And you might also want to brighten up the shadows on the other side with a reflector or a piece of white cardboard. Next, when you're posing your subject, have them sit in a comfortable position and with a slight turn of the shoulders to get that painterly feel in the picture. Additionally, choose outfits and a backdrop in a warm color palette to keep everything cohesive. Next, you can introduce props or clothes or accessories with interesting textures. Then you get a more three-dimensional effect in the painting, which will also make it resemble more the art of Viguier-Lebrun. Finally, you can do some color grading in Photoshop to give your photo that warm aesthetic. You can do that super easy with the adjustment layer photo filter. Just choose a warming filter, or you can use the color balance tool and add some reds and yellows. By the way, did you know you can download my ebook? It contains 50 ideas for portrait photography. It's completely free. You can get it on my website. I'm gonna leave you the link below. Now back to the video. Alright, the next painter I want to share with you is one of my all-time favorites, and he's called John Singer Sargent, and he is known for his very particular style because his portraits feel very spontaneous, but they're actually very carefully composed. Something that really makes Sargent stand out from other painters of his time is that he didn't really concentrate on formal portraits. Instead, many of his subjects are painted in motion or in very relaxed settings, which was quite unusual for the time and which makes the paintings feel very modern. So when it comes to photography, Sargent's paintings can teach us a lot about flow, posing and composition. His paintings really show that it's not always about chasing perfection, and in fact things like motion blur or imperfect poses or unconventional framing can add energy to your portraits and make them feel more authentic. So instead of aiming for perfectly symmetrical shots, think about how you can bring a sense of movement into your portraits. Because if you look at Sargent's paintings, the subjects rarely look stiff and they're always depicted in poses that feel much more natural rather than staged. So to achieve this in your portrait, maybe ask your subject to move around during shooting and don't let them hold one pose for too long, because that can quickly look very unnatural. You can use burst mode to capture lots of frames in quick succession, because often the most interesting or natural shot is sort of in between the moments where the model is changing pose when they're actually not trying to pose. Also, when composing your portrait, pay attention to negative space, because Sargent often placed his subjects not in the center but a bit off center, and he really used the negative space to draw attention to the face or to certain things in the painting. And of course you can use that technique just as well in photography to make your portrait look more dynamic and basically less boring. Okay, then the next painter I want to talk about, another one I don't quite know how to pronounce, I'll try my best. So this is Wilhelm Hammershøi, who is a Danish painter, was a Danish painter. Now he may not be as widely known as, for example, Rembrandt, but I think his work is so beautiful and I really wanted to include it here because it's very useful actually for photographers to learn from. In fact, I just took a self-portrait which was loosely inspired by Hammershøi's style. You can see it here. So this painter is known for his very quiet, serene interior scenes in muted colors. You can see that the color palette is very limited. There's a lot of restraint in his paintings, and I think they often feel more like a real moment and not like a staged scene. And in Hammershøi's paintings, you rarely find strong contrast or vivid colors. Instead, there's a lot of tonal variations and simple compositions, which overall creates a very serene atmosphere. And I think Hammershøi proves that you don't need a lot of information, visual information in a picture to communicate an emotion. In fact, a few well-balanced elements can be much more powerful than a super busy composition. So practically, if you want to incorporate Hammershøi's aesthetic into your portrait or self-portrait photography, you want to try and incorporate negative space and neutral tones into your photos. Really try and simplify your scene as much as you can. You can shoot against a plain wall or just a subtle backdrop and use a very limited color palette. And you're really trying to create the mood of the image through muted colors and a minimalistic composition rather than crazy outfits and makeup. Then, of course, lighting is another essential element of Hammershøi's aesthetic. He often used soft, indirect light. This is quite important, so not strong sunlight or anything, but really indirect light from a window, which created very even lighting without harsh shadows. To achieve this, you could also hang a transparent curtain in front of the window that will also diffuse the light really beautifully. That could give you a similar effect. And then there's a little trick to achieve that typical Hammershøi aesthetic, which I call creating atmosphere in Photoshop. It's super simple. You can do it using the brush tool. I explain how to do it in a blog post I recently wrote. I'm going to link it below, so check that out to recreate that beautiful Hammershøi aesthetic. Okay, and the last painter I want to talk about is Vermeer, super famous Dutch painter. And his portraits, they are just beautiful. They feel so calm and serene and almost cinematic. And again, like many painters of the time, he used soft, indirect window light, usually just coming from one side, and that gave his subjects a very natural, gentle glow. And it's really fascinating how simple everything is in his paintings. There are minimal props, minimal backdrops, nothing really competes with the subject. So for photographers, I think that Vermeer can really teach us restraint, a bit like Hammershøi actually. So in practice, if you want to recreate the look of a Vermeer painting, you want to place your subject so that the light is coming really from the side, which means you are illuminating one side of the face and the other side is pretty much in shadow. And this kind of light is very painterly because it gives you more dimension in the face. Everything looks a bit more sculpted rather than flat. And here's a self-portrait I took with this kind of lighting. I shot this during the afternoon on a cloudy day, so the light was very even, and as you can see, it's hitting mostly one side of my face. And that's it for today. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and see you next time. Bye!